What's good, everybody? It's Pineapple. Hi, how's it going? It's been a little bit since I've seen you guys, and I just wanted to talk about some stuff that's going to be coming up in the next season of My Hero Academia. We're going to be talking about Deku Black, right? Some people who are only familiar with the anime aren't really familiar on who that character is. So I figured, let's start getting into some of the stuff that's going to be happening next season, since I'm not particularly too excited about next season as far as like how it's going to look maybe or some things like that. I'm still a little worried kind of based on the events of last season. But I know the actual content of next season is going to be really good. So let's just talk about a little bit of that and actually go over some of the stuff that's going to be happening. Like, what is Deku Black? What's going on with that, right? If you're not familiar with that, who is he going to be fighting against? What that whole kind of period of the arc is going to be about. Because I do think that material is going to make it into this season. It's going to be probably the very end or the kind of, nearing the end of the season. But I do think it's going to make it in. So I kind of want to talk about it before we even get to that point. Because I wasn't really uploading at the time when that kind of stuff happened, right? When Deku left UA, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, right? But I wasn't really uploading at the time, so I want to just talk about it now because, why not? Better late than never. So let's talk about Deku Black and the time that Deku left UA. So right now is, it's an exciting period in My Hero Academia on one side, and on the other side, it's kind of like a period of change and like, really kind of settling into like the kind of series that My Hero is, right? Right now in the manga, you have two camps of people who are really enjoying it, and people like myself who is like, ooh, it feels like Hori is rushing this, it feels like Hori is falling off. But before this section, before everything went wrong, right? Before, you could argue things went wrong. Before things allegedly went wrong, you had the Dark Deku arc, or there's 50 different names for it. There's a Villain Hunt arc, there's a Vigilante Deku arc, Deku Black arc, I think is one of the titles people gave it after, Horikoshi revealed that he calls him Deku Black, right? I think it was about around the time that there's like this really cool figure of Deku Black, right? And there was like some volume notes and stuff that Horikoshi put out. So that's just like the name that he gives that version of Deku, right? And that happens after Deku leaves UA, and I believe that was around like chapter 306 or something like that, right? So Deku leaves UA following the events of the war arc, and from there we start really getting a kind of the best look at like the kind of hero that Deku wants to be that we've gotten throughout the whole series, right? Like, we keep getting these, like, idealisms where he's like, oh, I want to be this kind of hero, I want to be like All Might, I want to do this, but, like, in practice, what does that actually mean when you're not just put in a situation where you're there for a specific operation, or you're there to do something and then you're invaded by heroes, right? Like, what is Deku actually capable of when he's out on its own? And this arc very much serves as sort of kind of like Deku's My Villain Academia in a weird way. I know it's kind of weird to say that because My Villain Academia is already the villain version of like hero stuff, but I feel like this arc definitely serves a very, very similar purpose, especially for Deku, because this is an arc all about growth and internal discovery. And not just internal discovery, there's a lot of like external elements and stuff that Deku has to be made aware of, and Deku has to kind of take in to kind of form his picture, right, of what a hero is correctly, because we know that for most of the series, Deku has been looking up to All Might in a very serious way, right? But here, we thought that to a certain extent, Deku learned the lesson that you're not supposed to be like All Might too much, but here he kind of falls back on that, right? Deku leaving the school, one, kind of serves as him making everyone feel, his attempt really, at making everyone feel safe at him not being there, because he knows he is the main draw for all the danger, right? After the war arc, we know that Shigaraki has the ability to pretty much use search to hunt Deku down, so anywhere that Deku stays is not safe for the people that are also there. So Deku takes it upon himself to leave UA and start pretty much hunting down villains in an attempt to find All For One's location and bring all this to an end as quick as he can. It's a very, very All Might-like plan, right? It's the kind of thing that All Might definitely would have done in his prime, and we know All Might did do something similar, right? Like, he crushed all of All For One's villain networks, and he defeated all of his generals and whatnot, and then eventually found him and took him down. Deku's trying to do that now at this early point, where it's not really going to be effective because All For One has already lived through that, right? He's already experienced everything that can come with like a master of One For All hunting him down with all the resources and everything that they can have at their disposal and their allies and stuff like that. And he's dealt with that with All Might, so I don't think it was really ever a good idea for Deku to try that with All For One, but that's one of the lessons that Deku has to learn, right? Like it's easy in practice to say, okay, I'm not going to be all that like All Might. I'm going to try to differentiate myself. I'm not going to make the same mistakes that he did. But when push comes to shove, Deku very much makes the same mistake. He isolates himself. He doesn't really care about like what happens to his body, like how injured he gets, as long as he's in the process of saving someone else, or as long as he's able to save someone else. He doesn't really care about like a lot of things that normal heroes think about, normal heroes care about, right? Like we saw at the end of the war arc, all sorts of heroes thought about, this is a dangerous job, actually. Like, a lot of heroes found out being a hero is a tough and dangerous job, and a lot of them quit. But you had All Might, right, in the past who learned that from his All for One fight or just various skirmishes that he had, and he didn't quit. He wasn't able to quit, even though the actual threat to actual harm and, like, you know, fatal damage was very, very real and present, especially with Night Eye's prediction that All Might was going to die gruesomely to some villain in the future. So you have Deku kind of treading a very, very similar path, but also trying to figure out in the meanwhile, what is it about these people that makes them villains, right? Like, in the beginning of the arc, we have this cool kind of section where he sees just mentally in his head kind of, we recap over Overhaul, Shigaraki, Gentle, Muscular, kind of all the villains that Deku has faced up until this point in the series. And that was kind of the first hint, I feel like, that things were coming to an end. If you don't know, My Hero Academia's manga is coming to an end within the next year. That, I feel like, was the first major hint that it made it seem like it was definitely going to be ending soon. Because once you have author kind of, you know, re-going over all the past villains and starting to introduce them into the story again and stuff, that kind of feels like stuff that happens more so in the climax or when you're nearing the climax, and that eventually ended up ringing true. But over the course of this arc, like I said, we do see a number of Deku's villains, not too many of them, right, but we see some of the ones that he's fought before in the past, namely starting with Muscular. Right at the beginning of the arc, we have Deku pretty much finding Muscular as Muscular is fighting Yoshindo from one of the other schools. It's not Shiketsu, right? It's the other school that they've met and kind of been a little friendly with. So Deku meets up with Shindo and saves him from Muscular's attack, and Muscular is kind of like not really taking part in Deku's whole interview where Deku's holding him down with Black Whip, and he's like, why do you do this, man? You don't gotta do this. Muscular's just kind of like, it's fun, I'm having a blast. You know, it's been great so far. You really showed me that there's more fun I can have out here, so now I'm gonna tear you to pieces. And one of the coolest things that happens in the arc, and it's kind of hard to like pick the coolest thing because of some of the stuff that happens later, but one of the coolest things that happens in the arc is seeing Deku just one-shot Muscular. Right, like remember all the trouble Deku went through early on in the Forest Training arc to fight Muscular, and all the silly people who were like, this is 1,000,000%, right? Like, even though it couldn't be, it was just Deku hyping himself up. It's good to see Deku now with a more kind of higher mastery of One for All, being able to just take Muscular down easy peasy, no problem. Like, no problem at all, right? And it makes perfect sense because, again, this is an arc about Deku overcoming things and overcoming obstacles and growing while he learns about the different quirks of One for All, because that's another major part of this arc. During the course of this arc, Deku more or less masters and learns the rest of the One for All quirks that he has to learn, besides the very last one, which I guess we're gonna have to cover in another video because the whole thing with the second user's quirk is like a thing in and of itself. Some people on the timeline think it's time travel. I definitely think it's like a laser beam or something like that, but we can just talk about that later because I have an idea for that kind of video. But over the course of the villain hunt arc, or the Deku Black arc, or whatever you want to call it, we do see Deku is being supported obviously by the remaining heroes, right? We know at the end of the war arc, a lot of heroes are tired, so Deku's being supported in his effort of, you know, taking down all the heroes that were broken out of Tartarus by All for One, and trying to hunt down All for One while also trying to kind of form his ideology properly. He is assisted at the very least by Endeavor, you know, Hawks, and people kind of like that, like Genist, and All Might is even in the background a little bit, you know, driving Lamborghinis and being the most Bruce Wayne he's ever been. But at the center of it, it is still a very solo tale, right? It's the most solo arc I think we've ever gotten in My Hero Academia, where you just take one character and you really focus on them and what they're doing and what's going on with them and their struggles and their pains and what they're right about and what they're wrong about. And I really think that it's a very important arc in this series. I wish we would have got something like it a little sooner, and I wish it would have gone on a little longer, but let's not start talking about how long it goes on and whatnot before we've actually gone through some more of the content that's actually happened in the arc. So after Deku fights Muscular and stuff, we end up getting a couple sections. I don't want to go through everything, but the important stuff is we go through a couple sections where Deku is hunting down All for One, obviously, right? He ends up getting separated from All Might in this very tragic, kind of sad separation scene between Deku and All Might, and that doesn't go... like, that doesn't end up being resolved in the best way, honestly. It's kind of one of the biggest shortcomings in the series, I feel like. You have this very depressing kind of Uncle Ben and Peter-esque situation with All Might and Deku where they get separated, and then later they just meet up again, and it's kind of just like played for a joke, right? Even though I know some of that stuff is still going to linger on in All Might's story, I hope, right? It's just, that wasn't really the way to do it for me. But Deku comes up against multiple villains and he kind of makes a name for himself, right? Like, people don't know that it's Deku doing these things, but they know that there's like a hero going around in like a dirty, disgusting costume covered in smoke, because Deku's using the 6 quirk user's quirk, I believe. And I think he's using his quirk Smokescreen. Deku is like, you know, obscuring himself so that people can't exactly tell who it is. So again, like I said, they don't know that it's Deku, but there's this rumor going around, right? Like a very Batman-esque, early Batman-esque rumor that there's this person going around. You can't tell if they're a hero or a villain, but they're taking villains down. They're beating the crap out of people. They're covered in smoke. It's this figure. He appears real quick, takes everybody out and disappears. That was the kind of the badassery that we were starting to get into with Dark Deku or Deku Black. And I really appreciate Hori's use of Deku's quirks in this arc. Like, the whole quirk reveal originally was very kind of like, it made some people kind of were like, ooh, how's this going to go in the series? While other people were obviously really excited about the prospect of the main character getting more powers. But over the course of this arc, we get to see that they're not really anything too special, you know what I mean? Like, the quirks obviously are all interesting. They've been boosted over time, right? So they're more powerful now. But Danger Sense, being the quirk that allows Deku to pretty much have like a spider sense of some kind, that's pretty powerful, right? That's one of the more powerful ones, I would say. You have Float, which lets him fly, and I mean, the ability to move omnidirectionally is really important. But, you know, it's Flight, which Deku and All Might could pretty much already do just with the power of, like, Air Force and stuff like that. You have Smokescreen, which, you know, situationally can be powerful, but in most situations is going to be, you know, just, it's a smokescreen. You have Black Whip, which is actually very useful, obviously. You know, Spider-Man webs pretty much. You can swing from building to building. You can lock enemies down. You can do a lot with that quirk, honestly. You can save people. You can carry a bus on your back and do all the interesting stuff that Deku's done already. And then you have Fajin, which is like it's kind of like, I don't want to say a Kaioken, but Fajin is kind of like a quirk that lets you store up energy over time, kind of like in the way that One For All stores up energy over time. But Fajin lets you store up energy over time just on stuff that you do, like movements, or like, you know, the more kinetic energy basically that you could generate from a movement or anything that you do, you can store it and then use it later to use that kinetic energy to boost something else that you're doing. So by having like another boost layered on top of One For All, and then that boost is boosted by One For All, it gives Deku like a whole other kind of like tier level of power that he could use, right? So, and that allows him to pretty much get to 100%, right? He calls it faux 100%. That allows him to kind of effectively get to 100% style speeds and strength feats, right? Way earlier than he should be able to, because some people think that Deku's mastered One For All. I really don't think that he has, even as far as like the percentage stuff goes. And apart from like the damage that it will do to his body to use actual 100%, I just feel like he's not quite all the way there, right? But his mastery of like all the quirks together, right, is really what's going to eventually kind of put him over All Might, right? Just in the capabilities of all the things that he's able to do, right? Deku has a tool bag now of different options that he can use, and I feel like that versatility is definitely going to be useful over the overwhelming power that like All Might had before, right? Not that Deku's not going to get that overwhelming power, but I definitely feel like in this situation, this arc is all about proving that you can't just brute force your way through things, right? Deku gets in some situations where, yes, he obviously does beat the person, or he does beat the villain. Like, he fights against this sniper named Lady Nagan, who escaped Tartarus alongside Overhaul, and she's like a very well-known hero who, in the past, got arrested, right, and got put away basically by the Public Hero Safety Commission because they had her killing people and doing all sorts of like, you know, backdoor Hawks kind of stuff. And eventually Nagan started, you know, growing a conscience and stuff like that, and that really just didn't work for them, so they put her away. I think I want to do a video one day about the possible backstory that Horikoshi had intended for her, because we do know from recent volume extras that Horikoshi had a lot of backstory planned for Lady Nagan, or Lady Nagant. And anytime I say it anyway, people tell me I'm pronouncing it wrong. But Horikoshi had a lot of backstory for her plan, but I believe his editor, who, don't get me started on honestly, told Horikoshi to just kind of cut that back, right? So maybe we'll talk about the potential backstory for the Lady Nagant character, or Lady Nagant character, but it was a really, really good fight that she had with Deku. Obviously, I can't do it too much justice because I'm not showing manga panels or anything like that, since I don't want to get striked. But this amazing fight between Deku fighting pretty much a sniper, right, where he doesn't really have any long-range moves. I mean, you have Black Whip, but, you know, she was sniping the Black Whip. He doesn't really have anything that he can do long range besides what maybe is going to be the second user's quirk. So it was a very interesting battle. It was very tactical of Deku, and he ended up getting the victory, obviously, and getting away with that. And then from there, eventually, you have him meeting back up with the UA students like Bakugo and everyone when they find him, and they have like a little, I don't want to call it a fight, right, to hype it up too much, but they have this little skirmish where Deku was like, leave me alone, get away from me, I don't want to go back to the school, none of you can handle what I'm dealing with, I have to be the one to take care of all this right now. The students snap Deku out of that to a certain extent, right? Not entirely, I feel like, but to a large extent, they start the process of getting Deku out of that mindset, right? And I think that's very interesting because the whole series, Deku has been this character who he does things differently because he started off in a different situation, right? Everyone else has kind of had this time to focus on their quirks, focus on what they want to do as a hero, focus on what their idea of a hero is and how they can personify that themselves. Deku has kind of just had these fantasies about being a hero, these fantasies about having a quirk, and in the meantime, he really had to focus on stuff actually going on in day-to-day life and other people, right? He was one of those just random people on the street who would watch stuff happen like a giant villain attack or, you know, anything going on, like heroes saving the day. He would be there on the sidelines like we saw him in the very first chapter, watching that, right? So he very much knows the feeling and the role of being one of these people on the ground level because he actually was one of the people on the ground level. And I feel like that perspective, that change in perspective, that difference between Deku and like other quirk users who were born with their quirks and like a lot of their early years are based around, ooh, I have this power, look what I can do with it. Ooh, my power is growing. Ooh, I gotta train to go to hero school. Ooh, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of Deku's life is not filled with that time. So I feel like he sees things a little bit differently, and I feel like rather than that being a bad thing, it's actually really a good thing because Deku's way of seeing things and doing things, he's kind of spread that to the rest of the class, right? Where it's like, we have to do things together. Everyone has to do things together. Yeah, I'm Deku, I'm very smart, I'm focusing on everyone else's quirks, I'm focusing on everything else going on in society, so instead of focusing on just my quirk, I'm focusing on everyone's quirks, and because of that, Deku was able to form very effective strategies, making use of other people's quirks in ways that they didn't think of with their own ability, right? Because he's not just thinking of one person or one part, or you have like these three things here. He's thinking of like everything together in a very like all for one kind of way where you take advantage of all the things that you possibly can to the perfect effect. But whereas all for one uses people, right? He kind of uses their quirks instead of valuing the person. Deku's very much, his plans are always based on valuing the person behind the quirk and what they can do while also taking advantage of their quirk and stuff like that. So in this arc, it's very, very big for Deku to kind of fall back from that mindset and kind of go more towards like an All Might style mindset, and then have the class come in, everyone who's learned from Deku and Bakugo obviously, have them come in and teach Deku like, hey, smack him on the head like, hey, no, you taught us that we can't do this. You know what I mean? Like, you showed us what you're doing right now is not the way to do things. And we learned from All Might. We've learned from so many things. We can't take this step back here. Like, if you're in this class, you can't just write them letters and they'll just be like, oh, well, Deku's gone, he's gonna handle everything on his own. Like, no, Deku and Bakugo were really the ones who Aizawa himself said drag the whole class forward, right? And kind of like inspire everybody in the class to be better and change their outlook on things. So I think everyone watching Deku over the course of the series has really learned quite a bit, right? And they've learned the lessons that Deku himself has learned, but isn't internalizing in this arc. And he's not really working off of any of that information or any of the stuff that he's learned. So I really, really did like the class reminding Deku, like, hey, this is not the right thing to do. You're trying to be like All Might. You're trying to take care of this like the All Might way. We know the All Might way isn't going to work. All Might did it. He failed to defeat All for One, technically, right? We're back here in this situation. All Might couldn't save all the people that, you know, needed to be saved at the time, like Tenko or anyone like that. We have to do this differently, and you're the one who showed us that if we all work together, we can do something that's impossible. And that was very much the point of the Overhaul arc, right? Not to go off on too much of a wild tangent, but the whole point of the Overhaul arc is that if everyone works together and focuses their will on doing one thing, just one thing, saving that little girl, right, then even the impossible, the literal impossible, can be made possible through the power of One for All, and of course through the power of Eri helping out. But Eri is just another person in that equation, right? If everyone is helping out, you can do something impossible. So even if it seems like it can't happen, situations like the very beginning of the series, right, where Bakugo is getting controlled by the slime monster or whatever, if everyone would have worked together, even without All Might being there might have been a way where they could have done something, right? There might have been a way where they could have saved Bakugo, but they didn't even try. They didn't even want to attempt it. And they gave up before really giving an effort all together. Everyone individually did their thing, but they never tried to do it all together. And Deku's the kind of character where if he sees that, he sees no one else is going to do anything, he's going to go in and do it by himself. If he feels like there's no support that he can count on and he can't count on anybody else, he's not going to think of including anyone else or even thinking of himself or thinking about I can get hurt or anything, right? He just runs in and gets busy. So I feel like that is something I really like about Deku's character, but that's something that does need to be toned back a little bit, right? Like his self-sacrificial nature, his willingness to just kind of do everything by himself needed to be washed away largely in this arc. And again, I'm repeating it for the 5th time, but I really, really love that it was the class that came in and did that, because it reinforced to me that they have been learning the lessons that Deku has been teaching everyone in the class, right? Because one big question I had regarding My Hero Academia was, okay, for this series to be successful, for it to really successfully get at the problems that it's asking, Deku has to somehow change society. And how is that going to happen? Right? Because society can't continue as is, because we know that leads to the creation of people like Toga, like Dabi, like Shigaraki, like Nine, like all these characters have similar backstories, right? They were abandoned, they met a villain, and then they became villains, stuff like that, right? Like, or they had a good situation, they had a bad day, now they're a villain because they were abandoned by society. Those kind of things happen because of the way society is and because of the hero structure and people's ideas of heroes being on this pedestal, and there can't really be this level of cooperation that there should be, that if there was, people like Shigaraki or like, you know, Toga or Dabi wouldn't fall through the cracks and eventually become the dangers to society that they actually did end up becoming. So the way that it gets tackled in this arc is through a very, very heartwarming speech from Ochako about, you know, how Deku is tired and how, you know, everyone has to have faith and all this stuff. And it's a really, really great chapter. You should go read it. But that is another thing that I really, really appreciate this arc for, because honestly, I was worried, right? I was worried that we were going to end the series without society itself really changing or really feeling like it was going to change for good reasons, right? Like you could just write a 2-page panel, or you could write a 2-panel kind of dialogue where you're like, and society was better, but that doesn't really do it for me, right? So in this chapter, or these chapters of Deku returning to the school and Ochako really just like getting him back in that school for passionate speech, I really like how you have characters and civilians and stuff who were early, you know, there early on in the series, or there when Deku was, you know, trying his hardest, who really come together and understand, okay, we have been putting heroes on this like pedestal where they have to take care of everything, they have to do everything, and we're just like little victims and stuff like that, and they can't count on us, but we have to count on them, and it can't be that way. Heroes have to be able to rely on us to support them the same way that we have to be able to rely on them to support us. It can't just be a one-way thing. Everyone has to help each other. So yes, despite the fact that there are dangers in letting this boy, Deku, come back into the school, we have to kind of deal with that, right? We have to kind of accept that, because yes, there are inherent dangers, but there are also inherent benefits if he really does what he says he's going to be able to do, which is bring everything back to normal, right? And that's Deku's promise to all the civilians, and the civilians know that it's extremely unlikely. You know what I mean? The whole world has effectively given up on Japan, and it's so bad that you have members of the civilians, right, like working for All for One and being like, you know, things are so bad, they're gonna lie to us and whatnot. All for One told us they're gonna keep all these things a secret, so let's betray them. Let's just give him information and betray the students and betray everyone, so that at least we know what's going on. You know, like at least All for One is very transparent with what he's doing. He you know, I don't really believe that, but that's kind of like what they've been led to believe, right? Versus where, you know, the UA and the students and everyone, they're always very secretive, and, you know, it's always like secret operations and stuff like this going on, or things that they won't talk about publicly going on. But that's been breaking, right? Like they ended up telling the civilians information that All for One told the civilians they weren't going to tell them. And I feel like that is like one of the first steps in changing the minds of those All for One supporters. You know, I don't think those people are going to go to jail or anything really negative is going to happen to them, right? I think there are civilians that are All for One supporters that we've seen, absolutely, that are gonna have their minds change drastically and become the strongest supporters actually of the heroes once they see the heroes actually take down All for One. I think the idea of taking down All for One is such a ridiculous prospect, but yeah, no, honestly, that is, I'm really getting to some kind of like recent arc stuff, but some of that touches back on some of the villain hunt arc stuff that we had from Deku, or the Deku Black arc stuff that we had from that section. So I don't want to go too far into like stuff that's currently happening, because we are in another war arc right now. We're in the final war, or whatever Horikoshi calls it. If he actually is ending the series, which, you know, I believe he is, but some people don't believe he's ending the series. Some people think he's setting up for a part 2, and I would love that. I cover My Hero on YouTube. It's kind of my job. So, you know, I would love if My Hero kept going on. Trust me. But I don't feel like it is, honestly. I don't feel like it's setting up for a part 2. I do feel like Horikoshi is planning on ending the story. So maybe this is going to be the last peak arc, where most people can agree, oh yeah, that arc was peak. Oh yeah, that arc was amazing, right? So not a lot of people love the ending to the arc. Funny enough, right? Like chapter 327, when Deku takes like a bath and all this stuff. Not a lot of people really love that, but most people can agree for the majority of this arc, it was pretty gas. And I hope they include it in season 6. I'm pretty sure they're going to, but if not, at least you have this video where I mostly explain a lot of the stuff that happened in the arc. But I left a lot of stuff out. Trust me, there's a lot of things that I just didn't touch on here. I don't want to just give you like a one-to-one retelling of everything and spoil everything before the anime comes out. I'm just trying to whet your appetite and get you interested, right? So if you want, you can go read the manga. I believe starting around chapter 306 is where that section of the story is. It's about like 30 chapters or something like that. You can knock it out in a real quick reading, or you can wait for the anime to come and we'll discuss it here, hopefully, right? Hopefully, if I start uploading and everything, we'll discuss it here when the anime in season 6 comes out, and we'll see whether or not Bones does it justice, right? Because last season, I don't know what was going on with Bones. Like, I don't know what was going on with Bones, with My Villain Academia and everything, but I lost a lot of faith. I'm really worried about this next season coming up, so that's why we're doing videos like these, discussing it before it even happens, because I know if it's ugly, if it's bad, if stuff gets skipped over, important stuff, or it's not animated well, or like this or that, I'm not going to want to talk about it when it gets animated. So let's talk about it now. Hopefully we do have this conversation again and start talking about this stuff more in depth and more in detail when it actually comes out in the anime. But for now, you know, I'm doing a little precautionary before uploading, and let's see how it works out. So I love you guys. It's Pineapple. I'll see you again soon. Peace.